Welcome to the Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the complex political blueprint of an Islamic state. Now, we are basing this entirely on our curated source text, so we're just unpacking the legal and political foundations to understand exactly how this system is theorized to work. No political endorsements here, just a really fascinating look into a distinct ideological structure that honestly continues to shape global political discourse today. So let's break it down.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our mental map for today. First, we'll define sovereignty and authority. Second, we'll see how sovereignty belongs to Sharia. Third, why authority belongs to the Ummah. Fourth, we'll look at the actual role of the caliph. Fifth, we'll cover internal and external sovereignty. And finally, number 6, theory versus practical reality.
All right, Section 1, defining sovereignty and authority. To accurately understand any government, we really have to break down its foundational pillars first.
So who actually holds supreme power in a state? It's a massive question, right? But it's absolutely vital. Before we even look at specific institutions, we have to understand who has the ultimate right to make the law and who has the power to actually enforce it. And the source uses this exact distinction to introduce the twin pillars of any ruling system. The text distinguishes between two crucial Arabic terms to clarify exactly how power functions in this specific blueprint. First up is siyada, which means sovereignty. Basically, this is the supreme authority in a state to impose and alter the law. Second is sulta, meaning authority. This is the executive power to actually enforce that law and also the power of the people to elect their leaders. Understanding this strict separation between these two concepts, that is absolutely key to unlocking this entire system. And this brilliantly illustrates how the two are deeply interconnected. The famous scholar Imam Ghazali described religion and authority as twins. You literally cannot have one without the other. Sovereignty, which is the law itself, needs the people in authority to enforce it. The law and the people just have to work together. Moving right along to Section 2, sovereignty belongs to Sharia. Let's look at exactly where ultimate sovereignty lies in this specific model. Now, what's really interesting about this next point is the sharp contrast the source draws. In a typical Western democracy, you have popular sovereignty, right? The people are the ultimate lawmakers, and the general purpose of government is pursuing material happiness. But in an Islamic state, it's Sharia sovereignty. The law is divinely sourced, and the primary purpose of government, at least according to the text, is to facilitate internal peace by pursuing divine pleasure. I definitely want to highlight this quote from Hashim Kamali. Sovereignty for all intents and purposes, therefore, belongs to the Sharia. It really emphasizes that the state is not a theocracy ruled by a divine right or some special class of clergy, and it's definitely not a dictatorship. Instead, it's a system where the law itself, the Sharia, is the highest sovereign. Rulers are just fallible human beings, but they're entirely bound by this supreme legal framework, which is meant to mitigate human dictatorship. That brings us to Section 3. Authority belongs to the Ummah. Let's examine the role of the general public, known as the Ummah. Here, the text contrasts a standard democratic election with what's called the bay'ah. In a democracy, a vote is basically a social contract where citizens empower a government to make laws for their general welfare. The bay'ah, on the other hand, is a strict Islamic citizenship contract, a pledge of allegiance that legitimizes the ruler. The people freely choose the ruler, sure, but they authorize him specifically to execute the Sharia, not to just legislate based on popular demand. I absolutely love this highly visual metaphor from Kabul al-Bar. He says, the state is like a tent. The tent itself is Islam, the overarching structure. The pole holding it up, that's the ruler. And the pegs keeping the whole thing grounded and secure are the people. It perfectly captures how the different elements of the state hold each other up. If you pull out those pegs, the pole falls over and the entire tent collapses. All right, on to Section 4, the role of the caliph. Let's unpack the executive branch. So, the crucial point here is busting some really common myths about what a caliph actually is. According to the source, the caliph is not a prophet, he's not a legislator, and he is certainly not divine. What he is an executive, kind of like a president, strictly bound by a constitution and elected by the free choice of the Ummah. He literally has no authority to make something lawful or unlawful all on his own. And because that law is supreme, the source asserts that an executive who breaks it can and actually must be removed by the people. The text notes two main grounds for this. First, a lack of decency, which basically means openly violating Sharia law, and second, a physical deficiency that stops him from doing his job. He isn't just a hired employee you can fire at will without a legal reason, but if he crosses the red lines of the Sharia, he completely loses his legitimacy.
Section 5.
internal and external sovereignty. Let's see how this state actually interacts with geography and the rest of the world.
The text outlines some very specific requirements for a territory to officially be considered a land of Islam, or Dar-ul Islam. You can't just slap a religious emblem on a flag and call it a day. The state must have full internal executive control, so no fragmented territories run by warlords. It also has to maintain an independent foreign policy, and crucially, there can be absolutely no occupation or heavy-handed foreign influence dictating its internal affairs from international organizations.
Looking at external sovereignty, the text brings up this historical quote from Prophet Muhammad, "Do not seek light from the fire of the polytheists." The source interprets this as a strict prohibition on relying on foreign military alliances. Essentially, it means the state has to remain militarily independent. It cannot depend on the armies or the weaponized tech of non-Muslim nations for its own defense.
And finally, Section 6, Theory versus Practical Reality. How does all this measure up against modern-day nation-states?
Well, the source offers a pretty sharp critique here. It argues that many modern Muslim-majority states claim Islamic sovereignty in their constitutions, but they completely fail to implement it in practice. For instance, the text points to Pakistan, citing record-high corruption despite its constitutional preamble. It points to Saudi Arabia, claiming its Vision 2030 contradicts its own Quran-based constitution. And it points to Egypt, highlighting severe violations of due process and state torture, despite constitutional guarantees of human dignity.
So, you might be wondering, how does this theoretical model actually protect itself from just becoming a useless piece of paper? Well, the source concludes that the only way to safeguard the system is through strong, representative institutions. A House of Representatives, known as a Majlis, formal consultation, a free press, and an independent Supreme Court. These are all absolutely necessary to enforce accountability and physically check executive power.
Which leaves us with this provocative question to end on. Without true accountability, can any constitution survive reality? It's a delicate balance of power that literally every system has to navigate. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope this breakdown helped you grasp the intricate blueprint laid out in our source material. Keep questioning, and I'll see you next time.